Winoke Old Town was discovered by hunters in 1976, and the Virginia Foundation of Archaeology started working there in about 1979, and the site was excavated for about 2 decades or so until about the late 1980s. It turned out that this site just happened to have one of the largest collections, if not the largest collection of canine skeletons in North America and perhaps the Western Hemisphere. Most of them were found in articulated state, which means that they were found intact. They were not cut up, they were not butchered, they were not eaten, they were not removing the furs from them as you might fur-bearing animals. And most of them are in pretty good shape. I think we have an average of about 11 dogs per household or something like that. So in some American Indian cultures, wealth was measured by number of dogs a person had, like in some other cultures it's number of horses or number of cattle. Sometimes wealth can be measured in numbers of dogs. And so this seemed like a good opportunity to take advantage of the chance and involve myself in research on the prehistoric canines. Dr. Betsy Yule and I were introduced to each other about 2 years ago by Dr. Elizabeth Reitz here at the University of Georgia. We've been working together for 2 years, and we've had a very productive relationship working on all sorts of issues of dogs and paleopathology. We're looking at diseases of dogs, ancient diseases, and also making some of the comparisons from diseases of ancient dogs to diseases of modern dogs.
Unlike in human paleopathology, which has been studied for 100 years or more, animal paleopathology is a relatively new discipline. And what we do is we look at lesions in old animal remains, which can include things like bones, can also include mummies and other things. The one medicine concept is really based on the fact that animal and human diseases are very similar. And the medicine that's used in both human and animal medicine is therefore quite similar. Many of the diseases that humans get were around before there were humans, and many animals also get the same diseases. There are actually very few diseases that are truly unique to humans. So if we really want to understand diseases, studying them in a lot of different species and seeing how they manifest differently depending on the species can be quite important. People have probably heard of zoonotic diseases. Those are diseases that are passed from animals to humans. One of the big important ones in history was rabies, for example. So that is one that affects a wide variety of animals as well as people.
Anytime someone like an archaeologist can team up with a scientist in another field is a great opportunity. I'm a strong believer in interdisciplinary research. Anyone who works as an archaeologist spends a lot of time digging in the soil. We find all sorts of strange and interesting things. And then when you find something like 120 dog skeletons at a single archaeological site, it's time to call in people that have expertise that you may not have.
When I was first asked to look at this collection, and I started reading about some of the contemporary reports about the Native American dogs, some of the Native American dogs were fairly quickly replaced with European dogs. So I got interested in potentially, was there a disease that went through the dogs just like what had gone through the Native Americans? And the obvious one would be canine distemper. And as a bone pathologist, I know that when puppies are infected with canine distemper virus, it can infect the developing tooth and leave enamel erosions on the teeth. So with a group like this, where we have over 100 dogs of varying ages, if distemper was around as an endemic infection, in other words, like a childhood disease, we should see some evidence of enamel erosions on the teeth, and we have not seen any. Our not finding any evidence of distemper in this collection suggests that it was not present in North America at that time. One of the most interesting set of lesions that we found was on an older male dog that carbon dated to about 1250 AD. And if you look at the normal hip, it's a nice ball and socket joint with the hip fitting quite nicely into the ball and socket. And if you look at his other hip, you can see this is the socket down here that this ball was supposed to fit in, but it had been pushed up and over the top of the socket, and it was now articulating on top of the socket. This is interesting because when this happened, this dog would probably have been three-legged lame. But This dog survived the dislocation of the hip and went on to develop a second articulation surface up here, and probably could have potentially walked on this. He still would have been lame.
And we have another dog actually that had two injuries, I believe, and probably was not able to walk, and seems to have had I believe it was a dislocated shoulder and a dislocated hip, and probably would have required human care to bring it food, and animal probably would not have been able to walk at all.
What's happened in this case is that the head of the humerus has slipped from here to here. And this again was probably a traumatic dislocation. Interestingly, this dog also had a dislocation in his sacroiliac joint. That's the joint between the spine and the hip. And this is a chronic injury because there's proliferation of bone as it's been remodeled. This dog probably would have at least lost the use of two limbs for at least some period of time. And the fact, again, that it survived for these injuries to become chronic indicates that it potentially had been cared for, or at least that food was very easily available.
Some of the early English colonial documents suggest that these dogs were actually not companion animals. However, we have found these dogs in burials with humans and in other contexts that suggest these dogs were more than just work animals or more than utilitarian animals to these people. Now, we also have a dog burial that's included with a human female. In that particular case, it looks like the dog was a companion animal to this woman. They're both female. There's a female human, a female dog. They're both elderly. The woman is about 50 to 55 years old. The dog is probably one of our older dogs, so in the ballpark of about 7 years. The dog was placed on the elderly woman's feet, wrapped up in a circle, and then a ceramic pot was placed on top of the dog. And all of that seems to have been an offering. The dog as an offering to the woman, and the pot maybe with water in it, perhaps as an offering to the dog. They also are being included in some ritual context. We have evidence of sacrifice of dogs. We have evidence of dogs that are being included in burials with trophy arms or severed human arms. The arms tend to be right arms. They're cut off at the elbow. The arms are placed in a burial pit, and then the dogs appear to be sacrificed and then placed on top of the arms. So I'm assuming from that, and many of us have hypothesized that these dogs did play some sort of important role in the supernatural conceptions of the Algonquians and Proto-Algonquian peoples of Virginia.